Hello everybody, so I'm out in the woods today. It rained pretty heavily last night, so the landscape has changed quite a bit. But today we're here to talk about probably the most important life lesson you can learn. And it's something that's very difficult to learn and very difficult to live by. But is, in my opinion, probably the most important thing that you can come to terms with in order to get through life in one piece, in order to come out of the other end sane. And that is for those of you who grew up in the 90s or 2000s, learning how to take the L, how to take the loss, how to deal with failure, how to deal with your personal failings, how to deal with the world's failings, how to deal with when things don't go your way, when you look bad, when your pride's hurt, when your self-image is hurt. This is very, very difficult. And this might sound really trivial, but if you think about, pretty much all e-drama comes down to people being unable to take the L and them trying to get revenge on people who outsmarted them or made them look stupid or called them out on something or just goofy shit like that. And like, if they could just kind of accept that, okay, they looked dumb, they did something stupid, someone else made fun of them, it's over, just let it go, they'd be in a much better place in their life. But I find, like, in a lot of cases, the people who become real trash fires, and I know this in my family, is people who aren't able to take the L, aren't able to take the loss, even if it's not something that they themselves are responsible for, and to kind of accept it and to kind of come to terms with it. And it's a mess. And not being able to let things go like that and not being able to just take it on the chin every now and again will gradually make you become more and more angry and more resentful and more unpleasant to be around, and it will destroy you in your interpersonal relationships. So God knows I'm far from perfect at this, but I can at least acknowledge that this is where a lot of issues come from and try to analyze them and address them. And hopefully some of the stuff I'm talking about here will be helpful to you. So as I've talked about in the past, when I was younger, I still suffer from bipolar, but I medicated and got proper therapy and stuff, but I probably suffered from childhood bipolar. I was suicidal from a very early age. It's nothing to do with my parents. I have great parents. It's just some people have particular crosses to bear. Some people are born with physical deformities. Some people are born with mental ones. Some people are born with all kinds of different issues. Sometimes the circumstances they're born into are bad. Sometimes it's good. Everybody has a cross to bear. In my case, it was mental illness. And one of the ways that manifested was, I guess, in kind of some of the severe anxiety aspects that went along with it, was I had this kind of hatred of the external world, because I kind of viewed in my delusional state the external world as being this grand conspiracy or this metaphysical system that was set up to hurt me, to humiliate me, to damage me, that I hated myself, but I also hated the external world. So because I had such disdain for everything else around me, I was really unwilling to ever admit I was wrong, to ever admit that I made a mistake. If I ever got called on something, if I ever failed in front of someone, it made me very resentful and angry and wanting to get even at them and that sort of thing. And that builds up over time, and that makes you crazier and crazier. It makes you more and more resentful. It makes you angrier and angrier, until it eventually starts to destroy your interpersonal relationships. So when I kind of started coming to terms with the fact that this was a problem is when I was taking a philosophy class, and I lucked out in having a very good philosophy professor in first year. I took a couple different courses from him, and he was very critical of postmodern philosophy, and he focused a lot on the philosophy of the self. And one of kind of the theses of a lot of his courses were that pain primarily comes from the inability to accept change. I forget the exact person he was referencing. It might have been, what's his name? I forget. But there's this story of the well-lit room where there's a guy has a horrific home life, or people assume he has a horrific home life. But rather than dealing with it, he goes to like this fancy bar at 3 a.m. and just drinks all night. And that was kind of supposed to be a metaphor for how a lot of people try to deal with trauma, where they try to distract themselves or act like nothing's wrong, or go about their routine, but they never really face kind of what is actually bothering them. They never accept that whatever it is that's hurting them has changed, and there's maybe nothing that they can really do about it. It's someone who can't take the L, someone who can't really deal with it. And I really kind of started to think when I took that course, I was like, you know what? Maybe that's part of my problem, is that I can't let these perceived slights go. I can't let my resentments go. I can't kind of try to move on with my life for some of the traumas I've suffered in the past. And I kind of started to look at my therapy and stuff like that. And I was generally very self-righteous during it, saying, oh, none of this is me. This is the people around me. I'm doing nothing wrong, that sort of thing. And I really kind of started to wonder about that. And then at the same time, I was studying Buddhism in a couple courses, and that was all about how attachment causes pain, which is kind of a similar theme. It's caring about things and clinging to them and obsessing over them when they're impermanent, when they're flawed, will inevitably cause you pain. And the way to get away from that pain is to reduce that attachment and to learn to let go of things. And that's also something we do have in Christianity, albeit in a different way. The point of forgiveness in a lot of cases in Christianity isn't to grant someone pardon. It's not to say that no crime was done. If you forgive someone for the wrong they did to you, what it's about is letting go of your resentment, letting go of your anger. It's about you. It's about allowing you to move on with your life and to not be burdened by that. The actual punishment or lack thereof for someone's sins really doesn't have anything to do with you. If someone does something sinful, God will punish them. Whether you forgive them or not, it doesn't really matter. It's a separate issue. Forgiveness isn't about saying that person didn't do anything wrong or they shouldn't be punished. It's about releasing the power that they have over you, the power that their sin has over you, and the power that the resentment has over you. It's about letting it go. It's about you forgive the slight and you can move on with your life. So I'm kind of saying this is kind of a couple different sources. In this case, I guess you could say humanistic psychology, Buddhism and Christianity, that were kind of telling me the same thing. Sorry if I'm panning a bit. It's exceedingly humid out here. But yeah, so that was kind of what I was starting to get together. And when I started to kind of become Christian, this became more and more of a thing to me. This idea that, yes, we're all messed up. We aren't perfect, and God acknowledges that we aren't perfect. And we don't have to try to be perfect all the time. That life is about you screwing up, you falling short. Well, sin means literally to miss, to fall short of what God intends for you. But that there's always forgiveness there for when you pick yourself back up and you try again. That this world is imperfect and that failure is inevitable. That that life isn't fair and that that's a good thing. There's a scene in Babylon 5 I really like. Where the one guy said, life isn't fair and that's a good thing. Because if the universe was fair, we would deserve all the things that happen to us. and knowing that the universe isn't fair and we don't deserve the things that happen to us, makes me feel better. So I revel in the unfairness of the world. So the point is, your life isn't going to be perfect. It might not even really be happy. And that's just kind of the reality. And you just kind of need to accept that. And part of that is accepting that you have limited control over stuff that goes on. You have a very limited control over a lot of what happens in your life. Like, you apply for a job. Okay, there's the you aspect of it. There's your experience, you writing the resume, you doing the interview. But there's so many factors beyond your control. There's the other person, there's the technology in between, there's the various policies, that sort of thing. Maybe there's a computer glitch that deletes your application. Maybe the person couldn't sleep the previous night because of some sirens from an ambulance or something. And they're very negative when they're reading through your resume or your application or something like that. There's all these external things. And once again, if you look at something like success in life, obviously effort matters. Obviously putting in the time to get educated or to do exercise or whatever to prepare yourself for your chosen career or your goals is important. But there's a lot of things beyond your control. There's the environment you're born into. You have a certain degree of raw natural talent, biological or spiritual or however you want to attribute it, that you're kind of limited by. Maybe you're just not born with a brain with enough neurons to become that rocket scientist. Maybe you just don't have natural spatial intelligence, and no matter how much you work on something, you'll never be a great artist. Effort can overcome a lot of failings, but it's not universal. And I kind of doubt that if you try at something that you're completely naturally unsuited for, you'll ever be as good as someone who naturally is in that direction. There's also lots of other things, where you're raised, the time period you're raised, the school you go to. All these kind of things are beyond your control to a large extent. That's not to say that people aren't responsible for their actions, but it's to say that there's a lot of stuff going on. And it's not necessarily a mark on you if you fail. It's not a reflection necessarily that you're a bad person or an inferior person or you deserve what happened to you. It's just kind of the way the world is, and you have to try to accept it and come to terms with it. So, how does this kind of all come together? How do we go back to this? The point is, there's a lot of times in life where you're faced with failure. Now, this may be something as simple as you didn't tie your shoes up properly in the morning. I don't know, you're walking down the street or something, you trip on your shoelaces and you fall over and you look kind of silly or uncoordinated or something like that. And you start to worry that maybe people saw you do this, maybe they're making fun of you, maybe they're laughing at you. And you can feel resentment towards them. You can feel resentment towards the guy who invented shoes and the fact that we have, laces, and that we aren't using Velcro like big-brained people would. But what's easier and what's better for you personally is to just go, yeah, I screwed up. It happens. And then just move on with your day. And there you go. By just accepting it, going, yeah, that was the L, and just moving along, it doesn't hold any power over you anymore. Maybe another good example of this is, and this was something back when I used to watch the Young Turks, but they pointed out that the insults that really bother you are the ones that contain some degree of truth. Like, I'm not autistic, but I have nonverbal learning disability. I have some aspects that are kind of similar. So calling me autistic might irritate me more than calling me I don't know, a hedonist or something like that, or an alcoholic, or something with no basis of truth, or something that a lot of people get upset about is you're fat, you're overweight, you eat too much, that kind of thing. And if you are fat, what that often leads to, and I think what a lot of times what coping is, if we can use that meme for a minute, is an unwillingness to accept the L. And generally speaking, the results of not accepting the loss or not accepting the personal failure are much, much worse. You get into stuff like fat acceptance. You get into stuff where people are like, oh no, I'm not actually overweight, I'm not actually fat. Just the level of delusion you see among some people with regards to this. And it's just this kind of thing that hangs over your head. And this is true for a lot of different stuff. And people, I find, can kind of, when they go into cope mode, it can really damage them. Like, you get these people who, they have a problem with alcoholism or sex or something like that. And if you ever notice, they tend to, people who are alcoholics hate people who don't drink. At least I've noticed this in my experience, because it intimidates them. Because acknowledging that someone could not be an alcoholic means that they could not be an alcoholic, and that their alcoholism is a personal failure. And rather than just acknowledging that, they have to try to say that the person who doesn't drink is a pussy or an incel, or come up with some sort of like psychological justification for why they're actually morally correct to be an alcoholic, and the person who's not an alcoholic is actually the bad guy. You get into this a lot when you start calling people who aren't coomers, like who aren't jerking off all the time, are incels, or they're secretly, I don't know, something or other. That's, I find, what a lot of cope is. And I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it myself, but that's where most cope comes from. I mean, well, that's kind of, you're coping with the loss. Whereas if you were to just go, okay, alcoholism's bad, I have a problem that I'm struggling with and that I'm not able to completely manage. There, you've gotten past it. It's like this is the thing people get into who look at pornography but realize it's bad. They don't just go, yeah, I occasionally give in to looking at it, I have a problem, that doesn't mean I support pornography or I think it's something good. I think it's bad and it's something that I struggle with. They could just say that, and that would be fine. And generally speaking, most of the time when you admit you fucked up or you have a problem, other people have that problem too. And I know when I went to group therapy, and I started talking to people, they had all the same concerns. They had all the same worries. They thought people were thinking these things of them. And I was just like, no, that's crazy. Why would anyone think that? Why would anyone really care? And that's kind of the way it is. There's a lot of people who, probably most males in the millennials or Gen Y, who have some kind of issue with pornography. So you don't have to like defend it and say that it's like based and traditionalist and that people who don't jerk off to pornography are incels or like some crazy shit like that. You just have to say, look, yeah, it's a personal failing. It's something I shouldn't do, but I do. And you just have to kind of struggle with it. And that's something we all kind of have to do, is we have our flaws, we have our crosses to bear. If you acknowledge them and you try to work on them, then people can't use it against you. Like if someone's to say, Argent, you're fat. Okay, I'm fat. So what? Lots of people are fat. It takes away the power that the insult has. Now, that's not to say you just like become a human doormat and you accept anything negative people are going to say about you. But like I said earlier, the stuff that really hurts you is, generally speaking, stuff that has some truth to it. And if something's like partially true, then you just kind of acknowledge the part of it that's true and you dismiss the part of it that's not true. But unless it's something like someone's calling you a child molester, in which case you should probably get angry about regardless, because It's something that will never come off, and that's very, very difficult to defend yourself against, even if there's no evidence whatsoever. But generally speaking, if someone called me, Argent, you're a member of ISIS, it's like, I just laugh at that, because that has no, bearing on reality. Or you're a drug addict or something. That has no relation to reality. But once again, if they're like, and this is the issue a lot of people get into when they're trying to be like socially conservative, but then they also like have to say pornography is based. Like, here, I'll say it right now. Do I think pornography is evil? Yes. Do I sometimes give in to my bad desires and look at it? Yeah. I'll just come out and say I do. It's not good. It's something I've gotten much better at over time, but it is something I struggle with. So, like, by acknowledging it and acknowledging the shortcoming, also, once again, just take this with a lot of things in life. Like, I'm not saying if someone fucked you, you shouldn't try to bring them to justice, or you shouldn't try to make things better. It's not about that, once again. It's not about letting people get away with doing evil things. It's not about tolerating evil or normalizing evil. It's about you as the individual coming through life in one piece. Coming through life as a healthy, mentally put together person is what it's all about. And if someone like embarrassed you or insulted you or fucked you over or made you look bad, you kind of just have to let it go. I mean, I don't know, like someone betrays you, someone fucks you, you might just have to let it go. That doesn't mean you have to trust the person again. That doesn't mean you can't tell other people this person's a fucking snake, don't trust them. But if you just feed your resentment and your anger and your desire to get even, that's going to eat away at you. And that's going to put you in a worse and worse position. And that's kind of I don't really know what else to say. And it can be very difficult to draw the line between where justice begins and where vengeance ends. Or where fairness starts and hurt feelings ends. These things are very difficult and very complicated. But like, until you start doing that, like maybe just look at some internet drama stuff. Like, a lot of the Sargon versus Jim stuff is that Sargon has an ego. And he can't accept if Jim made him look stupid. Or Jim outsmarted him. Or Jim was just wittier than him. In a lot of these cases, if Sargon had just gone, yeah, I wasn't on my A game that day, Jim kind of outsmarted me there, or I kind of wasn't as articulate as I could have been, whatever, take the L and move on, then things wouldn't have gotten nearly as bad as they did. Sorry if I'm bringing up kind of like really low tier internet drama, but it's kind of a good example. Tonka Saw's refusal to just say, okay, I screwed up, I shouldn't have challenged Andy to a fight. Let's just call it off. I said something stupid and just move on. If Ralph hadn't have, when someone called him a cuck, decided the best way to respond to that was to release a sex tape, then he probably could have just gotten out of that situation. And that's how a lot of friendships end. And that's how a lot of people, like I said, fuck their lives up and fuck up the lives of people around them, because they can't take the L. Because they can't accept that something failed. It may not even be their own failure, but that there was a failure, that mistakes were made.